Hey, I think we're on board. I think we're online. I didn't hear the final beep, but I think we are broadcasting live to the world. Hi, I'm Pete Fenzel here with Overthinking It TV Recaps. Really excited to be talking to everybody today about something near and dear to all of our hearts, which is the ingredients that go into kidney pie. That's right, we're talking about Season 4, Episode 7 of Game of Thrones, titled Mockingbird. Mockingbird was, I think, a pretty solid episode, and I have a pretty solid panel to discuss it here today. Welcome to our viewers watching us live on Google Hangouts. Welcome to you if you downloaded this off the Overthinking It TV Recaps podcast feed. Make sure you subscribe to get the last 3 episodes of this great season. And welcome to everybody watching us on YouTube. We really appreciate that you made us your second screen for this premiere entertainment event. We usually start these recaps by asking about a moment in the show from each of the panelists that to them provides a doorway into interpretation for the major events of the plot and the other things that happen. But I feel like I have to start with a specific scene. Oh, and by the way, we are doing this live, so if you're watching live and you have questions for us, I'm on the Twitters, we're all on the Twitters, tweet at us at Overthinking It, and we will answer your questions live. Make sure that somebody else, there's my phone, I'll be watching this as we go. But already on the Twitters today, there's been some discussion about what the moment that we're going to discuss is. So I wanted to throw this moment out to everybody to start the conversation today about Mockingbird. And that is when Hot Pie, who has returned to us, yay, yay, Hot Pie!
Yay. Hot Pie!
Winterfell, Hot Pie! And he as apropos of nothing, or of everything, explains to Brienne of Tarth and Podrick Payne, sexual tyrannosaur Podrick Payne, the ingredients in kidney pie, how it is hard to get the right ingredients for kidney pie, the importance of gravy in pie. And I'm just going to toss this out to the panel. You speak first, and I'll introduce you after you make your initial case so that everybody knows who you are, how awesome you are, and what a special human being you are. But yeah, what do people think about the pie? What's in the pie? What's in the pie?
Listen, Pete, no gravy, no pie.
All right, that's Ben Adams.
That you can't give up on the gravy.
Right.
That's the key to the pie.
Now, for you, was the gravy, was that a weighty symbol for you for this episode or for the show in general? Did you connect with it, or not so much?
Maybe that line twinged with me a little bit, just the idea that he's the small folk. We don't hear much from the small folk in Game of Thrones. And so to have him be relatively optimistic about the fact that, like, yeah, sure, most of the country is on fire and or being pillaged, like, at this minute. But, you know what, he's going to find some gravy. So I kind of like that. I don't really know how that gives an entree into the rest of the episode. I actually felt that this scene was a little kind of detached and kind of its own little world from the rest of the episode. But I did like that one line.
Okay, well, before we move on, Ben, is there another scene? We'll talk about the pie, but is there another scene you want to put in the pot as the scene you'd like to start your conversation with so we can come back to it later?
Sure. I think since this is the Downton Abbey scene, I think I have to go to the scene where there's someone lingering just out of frame and overhears the whole conversation. So this is the end, the Snow Castle scene where Liza is peering around the corner as we find out at the end of the scene, because that's a Downton Abbey staple. But particularly the line, the 2 lines that knocking things down isn't fixing them, and then Robin's insistence that it was already ruined because it didn't have a moon door. And I think this is a debate that we actually hear other characters have about the difference between kind of destruction and creative destruction, and whether or not that destruction is justified because the society we're building doesn't have what we want in it.
All right, cool.
So, but others can talk about pie before we talk about snow castles.
I got a hankering, and then the only thing that's going to satisfy it is some kidney pie discourse. So who wants to get on board with kidney? Who wants to get on the train to Kidney Pie Town? I guess it's more of an ox cart in the level of technology we're dealing with in Game of Thrones. Anybody? Or am I going to eat this kidney pie all by myself?
Or wouldn't there be like a industrial revolution? Aren't we rife for that? And so the railroad is going to drive right from King's Landing all the way up to Castle Black and, I don't know, make Walder Frey and the twins irrelevant?
Well, Matt Rather, ladies and gentlemen, pitching us a Blazing Saddles Game of Thrones crossover where evil robber barons with public subsidy crisscross the country enacting their own private justice.
And Podrick Payne comes and says, "Excuse me while I whip this out." and gets a proclamation or something like that. I thought that it was a great Downton Abbey scene, but it was the wrong Downton Abbey scene for this episode. I was talking on Twitter today with Ben Snitkoff, who has been on the Overthinking It podcast as a guest. On Twitter, he is Snitty, if you want to look up the correspondence between him and me. And he tweeted at Overthinking It and at Fenzel and said, "So, Downton Abbey scene, hot pie, right?" And I wrote back and said it would be, except I felt like this the read that I have for that speech is it's about plans, and it's about sort of understanding that there are things that there are things that you should value that are not that don't necessarily seem like the main event, but that are actually more that determine success more than a lot of the bigger ticket items seem to determine success. But this wasn't a Downton Abbey. This wasn't a Downton Abbey scene for this episode because to me there are two kinds of Game of Thrones episodes. Those episodes that fall neatly into one of two kinds, and those that don't. No, there are two kinds of Game of Thrones episodes. There are those that are about the question, who am I? And then there are those that are about the question, what should I do? How should I act? Right, and so they're the identity episodes and the strategy episodes, more or less. And this one, and maybe there's another subset, which is kind of what is the world like really, right? Though that's entailed by both of these things. To me, this was a who am I episode, and I have a sort of a sketch of what I think the theme, of the episode was, and it didn't have to do with what Hot Pie was talking about, right? This was to me an identity episode and not a making a pie, not a making a plans episode.
Cool. All right. Well, that's Matt Rather's take on the pie, backpedaling furiously from his tweeting that it was the appropriate scene earlier today. No, it's all well and good. There's plenty of pie to go around. Shayna Malowski, you're the last one left on our illustrious panel, so I will introduce you before I force you to say anything, because you deserve that honor. Hey, how's it going?
Thanks, Pete. Well, I've been told by the Twitter Nation that I am, of course, the one who has to make everything into some sort of penis joke. So I'm going to say the gravy is semen. Well, no, that's not actually what I'm going to say. No. I'm actually with Matt on this one, and want to think that this scene is about value, and specifically not necessarily valuing money, but to value things like the gravy that really makes life worth living. But I want to connect that to what I think the real Downton Abbey scene is, which is the one that I don't believe was in the books, with that guy who's just sitting on the road dying, and sitting there and having a long conversation that outline as you do. And the line that I was really thinking of, which was sort of linked to what we were talking about, I think it was last week, about the bankers and value and so forth, where he says that life used to be about the notion of fair exchange, but nowadays there's no balance anymore. And that's what he thinks is the main problem with Westeros these days. And that conversation was all full of like this weird arithmetic that had to do with mortality. For example, he was saying that life greater than pain, which is why he wants to keep living. But Arya was like, no, death is better than pain. It has a higher value. You should die. And then he's like, nah, I'm good. And then she says, but death equals nothing, and nothing is nothing. And that's fine, because it's just nothing. So we have all these conversations about what is worth more than what. Of course, Arya, the Hound, or the Hound specifically, has a price on his head, and I guess she has a price on her head too, even though everyone thinks she is dead. But anyway, so there are things that are worth lots of money, like people's lives, but then there are things that are worth more than money, perhaps, or things that are, I don't know. I think this conversation is worth talking about throughout the whole episode, but I'm going to stop talking now so someone else can jump in and talk about that, or semen.
Well, I'll talk about the pie and how I saw the pie and how it connects to what you guys have all said, and we'll kick it around again. So one thing you said, Shayna, and this was what I was going to say about it, is that the pie scene is related to the idea of what makes life worth living. And it's not just Hot Pie talking about the pie, it's also Brienne talking about how excited she is to have comfort after she has been sleeping in ditches for weeks. And this tension in Brienne between the ascetic side where it's like, don't get drunk, and then Podrick Payne looks really sad because he wanted to get drunk. It's been a couple weeks that he's had any fun, and he was hoping to get drunk, right? And it's the whole, like, there'll still be cakes and ale kind of situation where no matter how highfalutin the issues are of the day, no matter how pressing the issues of global or personal destruction might loom, people still enjoy things like food and sex, and they enjoy them for their own sake. And it's part of what makes their lives worth living. That's what's part of what makes it worth fighting for, right? Is the idea that you can have pie, right? Or you can have sex. This is one of the reasons why I feel like while a lot of the sex scenes in Game of Thrones the TV show have been gratuitous, the presence of sex scenes in Game of Thrones is not gratuitous because it's not just about people doing machinations against each other just for the sake of machinations. It's about the pleasure and the sensory enjoyment that people get to participate in, provided that they are alive and have the money and means to do so. And so then the question is, well, what is the gravy, right? If the gravy is the thing that, if it's not a pie without gravy, then the gravy is a loaded symbol, I think that you can look through this episode and you can point out a whole bunch of different gravies, wherein without the gravy, the pie isn't a pie. Right, and so, I mean, one that jumps right to mind is Daario Naharis, right, who says, well, I could stay here, and I could, patrol the streets because I promised to, but for me, my life isn't worth living. My pie isn't a pie unless there's, pie, but which is awful, no, unless there's women or murdering people, like going out and fighting, and that's my gravy, right? Like the Night's Watch scene, right? It's like, oh, well, we could seal up the gate, and it would make it easier to defend the wall against Mance, but then we wouldn't be the Night's Watch anymore. And for them, being able to range north of the wall is their gravy. Without that, the pie isn't a pie, right? You've got the conflict between Sansa and Robert Arryn, where Sansa builds this home in the snow because for her, she needs to have a home. She needs to have this idea of Winterfell. She can be in a castle, but it should also be the castle that is her home for her, that matters to her. And without that, there's something that's incomplete. And for Robin Arryn, for Sweet Robin, right, a castle isn't a castle unless it has like a theatrical way of executing people through gravity, right? It's like you have to have a hole to shove people out of. And it's like, wow, this kid's really maladjusted. But that's his gravy, right? That's his gravy, is that's what it was necessary for him to be powerful, and that's how he sees relationships and all that other stuff. And just sort of close out the gravy talk, there's a bunch of other examples too, is that there's a gravy reversal in the episode where there's the overlying question of does anybody really want Tyrion to not die? And like how badly, right? Like, is Tyrion's life worth anything? Is there any gravy in Tyrion? Right? Is there anything that makes his life worth living? Is there anything for me that makes my life worth living that would then I can weigh against that and say, well, okay, I'd rather stay alive, so I'm not going to put my life on the line for Tyrion. Right, and it's this battling of people's gravies against each other. And then you get to this final reversal where you realize that Tyrion's gravy isn't the thing that makes Tyrion's life worth living, right? The thing that sort of defines Tyrion's life as distinct from other lives isn't like the pleasures and the good things and the other sorts of things, the sensory enjoyments that Tyrion always talks about, or how smart he is, or that he defended the city. The thing that makes Tyrion's self-worth being Tyrion is, in the eyes of everyone else, is that he's this monster, right? So you have this speech by Oberyn Martell where he talks about how excited he was to see Tyrion the monster and how he was disappointed when Tyrion wasn't a monster, because without the hooves or the horns or the tail or what have you, a monster is not a monster, it's just a baby. Right? So without the gravy, it's not a pie. Right? So everybody wants Tyrion to be this monster that they can all kill, and the reason that Oberyn Martell is willing to step forward for him, yes, he wants justice against the Mountain, but it's also because he doesn't see Tyrion as having the essential quality that everybody else sees Tyrion as having. So that's my speech about the gravy across the course of this episode and the many things that it symbolizes. And so we can move on to other Downton Abbey scenes as people see fit. I mean, I'm curious about some of the
I want
themes.
to talk about gravy. Well,
No,
no,
but I mean, I think
especially-
if it's
Sorry, especially that scene, because Oberyn's gravy we would have thought would be having orgies in the whorehouse, right? But in this case, as you just said, it's not. I mean, he said in previous episodes that that is what makes his life worth living, willing to die for something else, which is fascinating to me. And also interesting is that scene with Bronn where he was talking about how he wasn't going to fight for Tyrion. And just to connect it to my previous Downton Abbey scene so it doesn't, just go to the wayside, is that his over time. In the past, he just wanted money from Tyrion specifically. He fought for Tyrion before. But now he has money, and now the money isn't gravy anymore. The money is like the kidney pie. It's just like, what he, needs to survive. It isn't like the great stuff. What he wants is a castle. And so he's going to marry this woman who's kind of dim-witted and possibly kill her sister, trading her life for a castle. And at this point, he doesn't want to trade his life for just gold. So it's just a fascinating situation how value is shifting over time. It's not steady. There isn't just like a balance. What is called fair exchange was once one thing, and now it's another. So I think that's fascinating, and we can move on to something else, but I wanted to gravy it for a little. Go on the gravy train.
I'll tack on one scene as the scene with Dany and it's a me, Dario, in Marine, because this is kind of the first time we've seen Dany do something that isn't kind of strictly limited to, or at least the first time in a while that we've seen Dany do something that isn't strictly limited to kind of her mission of liberating the slaves, conquering Westeros. Where she, as Liz Lemon would say, she took her reward with Dario, and so that for Dany is finally her taking like some sort of like pleasure in ruling, instead of just like purely going after this this kind of messianic quest she's been on.
I mean, do you feel similarly about Dany's strike back at the Yunkish? As something that she did out of pleasure. I'm legit curious. I tend to think of it that way, but
I think it's interesting because it's hard to tell to what extent she actually changed her mind and how much of it was like kind of a leader playing her lieutenants off each other there. But I think honestly Jorah did kind of change her mind about what to do with the Yunkai, and I think she kind of realized that going too far in one direction would be a mistake. And that actually kind of links up with that thing about whether or not, if you, sorry, I'm looking for the quote here, what Sansa and Robin were talking about creative destruction, about whether or not you can rule and destroy at the same time. Because at first, for Dany, she can't rule the Yunkai with the Masters in place. Like, it all has to be knocked down because there's no moon door down there, or because there's this problem in society. And I think Jorah convinces her that's not the way to rule a kingdom. But I found that interesting because this is this weird kind of power dynamic where she's keeping her different lieutenants in their different positions and kind of playing them off each other.
Cool. So Matt, you've mentioned that you have some other thematic considerations. Obviously, it's not a one-dimensional episode. It comes at things from a bunch of different angles, and I'm always curious because often when one of the reasons why I was sort of getting the pie stuff done first is I felt like if other people made a plausible case for what the episode was about, I would feel silly talking about the pie anymore because it would obviously be about the thing that people were saying it was about, as it so often is obviously about the thing that you think that it is about. But yeah, could you pepper in some of your view of how you
you'd like me to season your kidney pie with a
Please
little
do.
bit of,
It's not a pie without gravy, but it's not a rather pie without seasoning. And I'm talking about the thing Shayna was talking about earlier. No, never mind. Go ahead.
So the well, all of overthinking it is that for all of us, isn't it? So I mean, it struck me how many times in this episode you had two characters coming in kind of face to face. with one another, and there was a question about how much are we actually like each other, right? How much are we sort of related to each other? Jamie and Tyrion at the beginning. A lot of references to brothers, the brothers of the Night's Watch, brothers owing brothers loyalty, but also even Melisandre and
Selyse, right?
Selyse,
Yeah.
right in the least sexy bathtub scene ever, right? And by the way, Melisandre's gravy is like the bath oils, you know. That's what. Right, that's what she likes, because she spends so much time with the fire. She likes a little water with some nice smelling bath oil in it. Coming both as sort of as having been lovers of Stannis, right? Like and sort of looking at one another and sort of seeing the way that they're alike and seeing the way that they're different. And a lot of the time they are sort of failed. There's kind of a failed mirror. One is sort of the bad member and one is the good member of the dyad, and you see this especially in Lisa Aaron getting pushed through Chekhov's Mundor, right? And she's the bad sister. She's the one who thought she was like Cat, right? She thought she was a mirror of Catelyn, but in fact she wasn't. She was sort of a substitute or a stand-in. The same thing happens in the Night's Watch scene when what's his name, Brother McAsshole, who is running the Night's Watch now, turns and looks at the First Builder and says, "Well, what say you, First Builder? Should we seal up the tunnel?" And everyone looks at him, and it's clearly he clearly is going to say yes, because that is by far the smartest course of action at this point. And Brother McAssholeston starts to look worried, but then he says no, right? And so he is sort of the false brother, right? He's sort of casting his lot in with the wrong. With the wrong brother. And then also, I mean, sort of doubling like the Hound killing the guy and then Arya killing the guy for vengeance. The Hound killing the guy for mercy and Arya killing Rorge for vengeance. The Tyrion Bronn scene. Another interesting one for me was Jorah Mormont and Dario Naharis. As sort of rivals, kind of the inverse of Stannis's two ladies. You have Daenerys's two men who are sort of rivals for her affection and for her kind of warmth and approval, right? So this to me was an episode about sort of coming to terms with which one you are, right? Coming to terms with which of the two you are, and like which brother is Tyrion, right? And it's not a super easy or super schematic division. I mean, one of the strengths of George R. R. Martin generally is that he sort of sets these things up and then cuts their hand off. But the division, I think, I still think it's there. It's operating, this idea of doppelganger, of counterpart, of mirror, rival, brother, sister, and coming to terms with those relationships and kind of working through where you stand in those relationships seemed to me to be the theme of this episode.
Yeah, it seems like that intersects with the title of the episode pretty cleanly. Mockingbird, right? Because if you have one person who sort of if there's one person who sort of ends up on the better end of things and one person who ends up on the worse end of things, right? And then there's a mimicry, or there's a copying that happens, right? And then there's someone who's left sort of wondering why they weren't the one and why it was this other person instead. If that's kind of a theme that keeps happening over and over in the episode, with this sort of where everybody's making Jorah Mormont eyes, like, oh, like, oh no, everybody's feeling that way, like Selyse is feeling that way. The Builder is also like, oh no.
Golly,
But yeah, and of course the Mockingbird, for those I'm not familiar, is the sigil of Peter Baelish. Peter Baelish's personal sigil. He wears a pin on his neck with the Mockingbird on it in this very episode to symbolize it. And the lore, the background lore, is that his family is actually from Braavos, which is where Stannis went to go take out a business loan last week, and because Stannis is all party all the time, let me tell you. But as we could tell from the bath scene this week, it's like, sorry, Melisandre, I gotta go talk to a guy about some credit. But yeah, but he's from Braavos, and his family crest was the Titan of Braavos, the head of the Titan of Braavos. But he replaced it with a Mockingbird because he wanted to have his own sigil. He wanted to make his own way. Perhaps he wanted to obfuscate his origins or where he was from, remake them, take on somebody else's role, right?
Also, he was in the Hunger Games.
Yes. Well, we could talk about that. Like, what does the Mockingjay and the Mockingbird have to do with each other, right? But maybe that's something.
What's about the climb? I don't know.
Well, I would say that it's about like the replacing something with something else that ends up imitating it. But we have to talk about that after everybody watches Mockingjay, because we don't want to put Hunger Games spoilers in this episode. But maybe we'll have a special Hunger Games Game of Thrones crossover series that will also involve Onslaught from the X-Men, just because I love crossovers so much.
Hot Pie and PETA could hang out and bake bread together.
Yes, perfect. Excellent. Someone write that webcomic. So to go back to the bath scene, because I feel like the bath scene in particular deserves a lot of mention. I mean, it definitely might have been the Downton Abbey moment of the episode. The idea of Melisandre tricking people with special effects to get them to believe in the thing that she thinks is right. Right? Like that's something that's introduced. It's like she introduces this idea of and how exactly does she frame it? Tricks lead them to the truth. Tricks that led them to the truth by saying, oh, okay, I can make a plume of flame appear in the sky, and then everyone's going to follow me, and then they're never going to really care that the plume wasn't real, and that it was something that was made up. And that was interesting. I felt like that was an interesting juxtaposition with her talking about the joke about the hot bath, which is that she stared into the fires, and Rolor, the Lord, right, told her that this was going to be her last good bath for a while, so she should make the best of it. And then she's like, "That was a joke." Right? Because it's like, maybe it wasn't a joke. But this is the idea that Melisandre is a zealot, and so if Brienne is sort of like 90-10 or 80-20, like work comfort, right? It's like, well, we'll have a pie and we'll sleep in a bed, but you better not get drunk. Like, we have a job to do, right? And then Tyrion is like pretty far on the other end most of the time, but has kind of been at a battle of these things and so on and so forth. And Daario Naharis is like, I want to do the thing that I want to do. Like, come on. Then, like, Melisandre sees herself as totally on the other side, where she is a zealot who is committed to her cause and will sacrifice everything that is necessary, including the implied sacrifice of Shireen, I believe, in this episode, where they seem to be talking about murdering her. It seems. I don't know if you guys felt that when you were watching it, but
definitely. Though it's one of those. It's one of those, like, I was speaking of the temple of my body. It's one of the little religious trickster moves, right? Like that that she's pulling here, I'm sure. Where like, oh no, in fact we don't have to. We just have to put leeches on her.
But the idea is that, like, she's a mockingbird in the sense that she's an imitation of. She has a sort of imitative relationship with the identity that other people see that she has, right? She's like, okay, I understand how other people want to see this fire priestess and what they expect to see from her, and I'm going to provide them with those things, even though that's not who I am, right? I'm going to create this identity for them that they will then appreciate, and then I will then use them to get to the truth that I want them to engage in. It's an interesting juxtaposition of truth and lies is coming out of her mouth, right? It's like, it's the idea that a bunch of lies can lead you to the truth is not unproblematic. And also not unproblematic is the long, lingering gaze up and down Melisandre's body by Selyse, as Selyse is talking, as Melisandre is talking about her high-minded ideas, about her strategies, about how everything is necessary, and Selyse sort of very intuitively understands that there's something a lot more basic that's happening here, and she's sort of like, aren't you just banging my husband. Like, aren't you just a little bit, like, aren't you just, there's part of me that just can't shake it. That, you know, and you're here, and you're naked, and it's kind of suggestive, and I just feel like you're kind of throwing it in my face, and I don't really appreciate it, right? I feel like that's kind of like part of what's going on. I mean, I don't know. Any other thoughts about the bath scene? Oh, go ahead, Ben.
I think that fits in, because what Melisandre excels at is bending everything into this worldview of the Lord of Light. Like, even her bath is about her religious mission of the Lord of Light. Like, most people don't say, like, even if you're very religious, you don't say that, like, I went to the post office today in service of my Lord and Savior. No, it's like you just went to the post office. But for Melisandre, like, everything can be bent into this religious mission, up to and including having sex with Stannis. Like, even that is part of, you know, this broader religious mission. She can justify anything by her religious service.
Like, the night is dark and full of boners.
Yeah, I had to laugh because this scene was the scene where you saw, like, the slightest bit of male nudity was immediately followed by a massive amount of female nudity, which is like the Game of Thrones, like, equilibrium balance. Like, you can never have the male nudity exceed the female nudity.
Well, there used to be balance in Westeros, but now there's no balance. There's no fair exchange anymore. Right. I mean, whenever you hear language like that, Shayna, does it make you think of Full Metal Alchemist as much as it makes me think of Full Metal Alchemist?
I didn't think of that, but yeah, that's exactly right. And maybe that's how Jaime lost his hand, is alchemy.
Oh, there's a 5%er joke. But yeah, it's is it a fair exchange to sacrifice the lives of people, you know, to burn people alive and whatnot to get things that you want from the gods? That's
and she makes clear no act done in the service of the Lord can ever be a sin. That's a line I can't remember if it's her or Mrs. Stannis. Selyse, yeah, I think Selyse says that. But it's clear they both agree with this idea that their religious mission is so pure that the means literally do not matter at all. It's only about the end here, which is obviously a recipe for all sorts of disaster.
But what do you make of the contrast between the bath scene where Melisandre is talking about the importance of artifice and lies, with the scene with the kidney pie, where Brienne and Podrick are talking, and they directly afterwards, Pod says to Brienne, "You shouldn't have told the truth about Sansa because people would want to kill her for money, and this is not going to end well." But then it actually does end well because they find out about Arya from Hot Pie, right? So in this case, the truth wins out. The truth is the best, you know? Brienne is also sort of a Mockingbird in that she's wearing Jaime's armor and whatever. And Hot Pie does bring that up, saying that Arya was also pretending to be a boy. Okay, but obviously Brienne and Melisandre are direct opposites in terms of their commitment to the truth. So, do you guys have any thoughts about that?
I think well, it's interesting because I think it problematizes this idea of having something that you care about, that you live for, and also it problematizes just identity in general, right? If Matt is saying that there are identity episodes of Game of Thrones and then there are sort of action-oriented episodes of Game of Thrones, this is an identity-oriented episode. If somebody is people have a hunger to establish a sense of identity, right? Like, and this is sort of one of the things that oaths and duties are related to, that helps you be the person that you are and define the person that you are. So going through truth and relying on truth is one way that you can achieve this thing, but you can also do it by lying. And I think it breaks down the dichotomy of it a little bit. It breaks down the opposition of truth and lies if they're both used in the service of kind of like self-construction and construction of the other. It's basically, I think it's to give us, because I think that the whole series has a difficult relationship with truth and lies. And in the books it's even more so because it's like 30 different unreliable narrators are all telling you what's happening, right? And nobody even knows, right? Like the most important plot points in the story, we don't even know what the freaking series is about yet, and it's been going on for 20, 30, almost 30 years now. Almost 20 years now. Sorry, 1996, right? So that's it's not quite that long. So it's almost 20 years. So there's a lot of like incomplete information and lies and unreliable things, but they still serve the purpose of truth in certain ways.
Mhm.
So it's interesting, and I don't think that Brienne and Melisandre are all that different in certain ways. But you're right in that they have very different ideas of like the categorical imperative in terms of like using people as means or doing something out of means to an end versus out of duty. Yeah, Matt, why don't you? I want to get you in the conversation on this stuff. I feel like it's your turn. Pick one.
Can I jump to a different scene and maybe talk
Yes,
about
that's what I mean. We need to modulate to something else, and you are just the man to do it.
Great. I thought there was something very sweet about the scene of both the Hound and Arya kind of hovering over the guy who is dying. Right, and like it's tempered by the fact that the idea is sort of sinister that they're gonna kill him, right? Like that this is the idea. He's too far gone. Though I suppose it is merciful, to end his suffering because there's nothing, there is no like dignified death left for him, right? This is the best of a number of bad options. But the just this sort of sense of kind of I don't know, taking time out and not killing him right away, right? Not like doing the strictly utilitarian move where you just stab the guy because he's in your way. And I don't know, letting him talk, and then later on when Arya is sewing up the biter's wound. There's something really very soulful, right, in the Hound's eyes. I don't know. I think there's something. Rory McCann is the actor's name. I wrote it down and was just checking in my notes. Gives good soulful glances into the middle distance.
You mean
right?
puppy dog eyes, Matt?
Well, yeah, in a non-romantic way, though, in the most sort of grizzled and world-weary sense of soulful eyes.
It is a very True Grit feel to it.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. By the way, Gregor Sandor is another one of these sort of good brother, bad brother dichotomies, right? Another one of these kind of dark mirrors, in which two characters are sort of reflected off of one another, right? And it's interesting, right? Like, because they both are associated with guts in this episode, right? The Hound sort of sticking his knife up to stab the guy in the heart so that he will die instantly, and the Mountain eviscerating people, and Cersei stepping over the chitlins as she walks to ask him if he's going to kill, and he says, "Who am I going to kill?" And she says, "Doesn't matter." Right? Those two are actually an interesting kind of dark mirror of one another. I think the contrast being hard and soft power, but a similar kind of ruthlessness, right? But yeah, I don't know, this scene of sort of talking about the guy, and Arya saying nothing is nothing. The nothingness nothings. It noughts, right? Rather than being like, well, nothing is a state. It's the absence of state. It's the non-state. It's not doing as you understand doing. It's the absence of doing. And yet there was something sort of sweet in the way they tended to him sort of in his last moments and talked to him sympathetically.
Yes, and speaking of not doing things and these dichotomies and darkness and things that have kind of a sweet moment, and what'd you think about the scene where Brienne and Podrick reach the fork in the road and decide to go to the right? Because it feels like it has a lot to do.
Sorry, they could not travel both and be two travelers. Long they stood and looked down one as far as they could to where it ended in death.
Bah! Valor Morghulis.
I took the road less murdered.
Well, let's say that. What does it say about adventure, right? Because it feels like to me in the show, and we mentioned, I think we mentioned this a week or two ago, that Brienne and Podrick are really, really firmly being rooted in post-knight errant fiction. Specifically that Podrick is being shot as if he were Sancho Panza, and that Brienne is being shot as if she's Don Quixote.
He can't get the horse to go straight. Right, he's and he's kind of a figure of fun. He's never done it. He's never cooked a rabbit before. All this stuff, making the squire a figure of fun. Yeah.
Right. And this idea that it's like, oh, you're not a knight. Knights wear armor, right? And it's like, well, what are the things that knights actually do? Perhaps they go on quests to rescue fair maidens with, squires in tow and all this other stuff. So Brienne and Podrick have this relationship with knight errantry, in the way, in particular, they're being portrayed in the show, and this moment where they confront the two roads in the woods and they pick one road. I mean, it's so on the nose, right? I mean, it's very, very meta. I mean, if the episode has a bunch of different sorts of dichotomies where like one is sort of the dark and one is the sort of lighter, or one is the sort of like you get to do this person gets to do it, this person doesn't get to do it. Well, I mean, the process of being in a relationship where one person gets primacy over the other is sort of like something taking one road rather than the other, sort of, right? But I just feel like there's something being said here about adventure in this episode, that we watch Brienne and Podrick like pick a road and go down it. Right?
Sure, on the slimmest of pretexts, right? Because it's well, let's go to the Eyrie because maybe they'd go to a relative, maybe that's what's going on. And I forget where we left Hot Pie. Did Hot Pie leave at the same time as Gendry, or is Gendry in a different place? Did we leave him off in a different place from Hot Pie?
Well, that was interesting because Hot Pie said there was a guy who had a bad look on his face, right? And he had an ugly mug or whatever, and he left with Arya. And I thought that was Gendry. I don't think that was the Hound, because the Battle of the Blackwater hadn't even happened yet, right? I thought that Hot Pie and Gendry and Arya all split up at the same time, right? They all escaped from Harrenhal together, right?
Right. Well, yeah, but then I thought they were traveling together, and then and then Gendry said, and Hot Pie also said, "Yeah, that's it. I'm done. Right? I'm not going with you anymore." And Arya was like, "Well, we have to we have to continue on." But anyway, I mean, I think
maybe
Arya.
Maybe he was talking about Jag and Hagar. That's probably who he was talking about.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I think he's because I think they were all captured by the Brotherhood without banners, and they all saw the Hound. And then when they were released by the Brotherhood, Arya went off with the Hound, and Hot Pie went off to go bake bread.
I got you. So Pie, that's okay. So it's after the Hound fights Beric Dondarrion in the trial by combat.
Right.
That Hot Pie leaves them. Okay, that was what I was missing. I thought it was before that. Okay, cool.
So where, I mean, figuring out where, because what had been the plan, Brienne's plan before this, was she going north to River Run to check in there? Like, or was she trying to travel to the north? It wasn't clear to me what they had done before they turned to the Eyrie. So it's like, well, we may as well go to the Eyrie.
They were going to go to Castle Black, right?
Oh, to see Jon.
So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they
assumed the girls would try to go to Castle Black
because Jon's their brother, but Lisa Aaron is closer.
And has money.
Yeah. I love that. Did you catch Hot Pie calling it Winter Hell?
Yeah.
That was pretty good.
Shayna, we're tossing it to you because you've been quiet for a while. There's a bunch in the episode we haven't addressed yet. Pick a topic and let's run with it.
Well, when you were talking about sort of adventuring, I was thinking about how in the past we were talking about the construction of story and how many stories were being told this week, whether they were about adventuring or just a backstory. Whether it was the story of Tyrion and Cersei when he was a baby and she was pinching him, which sounds painful, and he was supposed to be a monster. So it was like a monster story that was subverted. And then you have this story that's unfinished of Oberyn's sister and her kids being killed by the mountain, and so that's the beginning, and this is the middle of the story where he's going to fight the mountain, and we're going to see the end next week and see if it is subverted or fulfilled. So I guess what I wanted to say was that George R. R. Martin seems to always sort of beginning adventure does of Evil Ages or more recent fantasy stories like Lord of the Rings or whatever, but then they sort of go off on different roads, so to speak. And so I just think it's a very interesting way. It's not like he just subverts things for the sake of subverting them, and he doesn't just subvert them from the very beginning. It's like he starts the story, he tells the middle of the story, and then all of a sudden he's like, nah, let's do something else. So I don't know what you guys are telling in this episode and whether it relates to other episodes when we were talking about that sort of construction. But I'm going to pass it back to you guys. Pass.
I mean, the most obvious connection, I think, is to Varys and his sort of statement of purpose for the whole series, where he talks about the riddle of the sellsword and where does power reside. And this, we, of course, when we talk about discourse, that's what we're talking about, is the discourses of power and influence and the stories that people tell each other in order to shape the world, their perception of the world, and affect each other's behavior. So, stories and narrativizations are a necessary part of politics of all kinds. Well, not necessary, but present, because, I mean, whatever. If they weren't there, it would still be called politics. We don't have to conceive of a thought experiment where, well, what would it be like if there were politics with no stories? Like, well, there would be levers that people would pull. But no, that's not what I mean. But yeah, it seems to hook into some pretty large themes for the series in general. I mean, why we're reading the story, right? Like, the argument being made for why we should read this story is in turn being made in other ways by other characters within the story who are saying that you should read their stories. And of course, in the book, we have the additional meta story where there is a Song of Ice and Fire, right? This book series is called The Song of Ice and Fire. There is a Song of Ice and Fire that is mentioned in the book series in like a hallucination Danny vision scene of Rhaegar and whatnot, but there's an idea that there is the story of the story that you're reading that's going to exist at some point diegetically in the universe that we're watching, and part of what's happening is trying to figure out which of the many, many stories that are happening is like the real story, or any of them the real story. Right, I mean, that's interesting. Adjudicating and prioritizing these different stories is a tricky thing to do. What do you guys think?
Sorry, Matt, go on.
Oh, this is almost kind of a stray thought, but it's something I want to kind of plant a flag in because it's something I've been kind of tracking in the TV series. It's different from the book, and it actually kind of relates to the Song of Ice and Fire. Because for me, the Song of Ice and Fire is always about these two. If Westeros is the Titanic, there are these two icebergs like looming in the future. Which is in the north, you have the White Walkers, and in the east, you have Dany and her dragons, and like that's the ice and the fire that's coming to Westeros at some point down the road in the series. And one thing is that the TV show, I feel like, has done a little more than the book, is the characters on the show have mentioned these threats and been aware of them to a greater extent than I feel like they are in the books. So, like last week, we had Tywin kind of dismissing Dany and her dragons, saying, well, dragons haven't conquered a city in thousands of years, so they're not a problem. Like, this isn't something we need to be worried about, which is remarkably short-sighted for someone as canny as Tywin. Like, clearly, we haven't even gotten to this point in the books yet, but, like, clearly that's going to be a mistake to assume that dragons are not going to factor in the strategy of Westerosi politics at any point in the near future. Like, that's just, like, not going to happen. And ditto, kind of to some extent, with what we saw with the Night's Watch and the Wall today, where they're like, well, the gate has held for thousands of years, so clearly we don't need to bar up the tunnel because it'll keep holding. But like we know Jon Snow knows that that's not the case, that the giants are coming, and even if they hold out from the wildlings, you still have the White Walkers coming. But people have this kind of entrenched idea of what works and what doesn't work, and they're not willing to adapt with the circumstances. So I've been kind of tracking who is kind of paying attention to these icebergs looming and who isn't.
Well, most climate scientists in Westeros, say, they're part of a conspiracy about this winter coming. I don't see any proof of it, honestly.
I mean, it is interesting that just by the nature of it being television, they have to make the big looming threats more apparent. I mean, they don't have to. They could have not done it. They could have not. Yeah.
I think it's just an effort to tie the plot lines together a little more. Like, in order for Dany to seem relevant to the TV show, they need to have, at least in a small way, like influencing over in Westeros.
Yeah. I mean, I even venture to say that that's a problem with the book series, that he just takes too long to drive the main storyline forward. I mean, it's still great. I still love it, but, it is kind of a problem.
We are kind of waiting to get to the fireworks factory.
All right. Well, okay. So we have one question on the Twitters, which I want to address. It is from Brian Lewis, Dromedary. And he asks, and this is some very bad news. This is probably the most dire situation that Westeros currently faces, is what Dromedary wants to talk about. And it really affects Essos, too, and the Free Cities and the whole of the world of the Game of Thrones and the Song of Ice and Fire. Question for the panel. Have you considered using the bye week next week to recap and speculate on the season as a whole? That's right. What he's saying is that there is no Game of Thrones next week. There's none. It's Memorial Day, and as such, we do not barbecue. We do not sew. We do not barbecue and watch Game of Thrones on the same day. It is against the rules. So we will have no Game of Thrones episode next week. We will have a Game of Thrones episode in 2 weeks. So the question for the panel is: should we do a recap of the show not happening?
Could we do a Mad Men recap?
Are you guys really doing nothing for the holiday? Is that really like nothing's going on for you or anything?
Oh, you mean do I not have plans?
Are you
It's
calling
nice
us
to
losers?
No. I'm not saying. It's nice to work very hard for free on the internet because we have a lovely audience. But I'm just saying, sometimes you gotta. Sometimes you gotta throw the rabbit on the spit and turn it over the fire. That's all I'm saying.
Well, I mean, also keep in mind that Shane and I are here on the East Coast, and Matt and Ben are on the West Coast. So for us, we're recording these things at 9 p.m. Eastern, which is well past the end of most Memorial Day activities. But Ben and Matt are recording it at 6 p.m. Pacific, which is in that sweet spot of that sweet tangy barbecue sauce.
Right.
So maybe, Shayna, we'll talk. Maybe we'll do something Mad Men oriented next week to fill the gap. But I think we're going to take a week off from Game of Thrones rather than have kind of a macro, mega Game of Thrones, hey, how's everything doing kind of conversation.
Because I feel like that we've been moving chess pieces for a little while. Satisfyingly, these haven't been bad episodes, but we've known for a while that, like, or if you've read the books, you've known that the Mountain is going to fight Oberyn Martell. Right, and also, if you've read the books, you know what episode 9 is going to be. Episode 9 being the traditionally big battle episode. So, I've been waiting for some action. I don't have a lot to say about identity and the climb and all these other things that we haven't said already on the recap. So, I guess long story short, no.
Well, Mad Men it is. Because all those episodes are identity episodes. Every single frickin' one is an identity episode.
Who is Don Draper?
Who is Don Draper? This season, you'll learn who Don Draper is. This episode, you'll finally learn who Don Draper has become in the intervening time since the last time that we talked about who Don Draper is. Who is Don Draper? It's like, who is John Galt? It's a question that doesn't require an answer. Wait, that's not true. It's a question where you close the book after you hear the question. No, that's different. That's different. No, I like Mad. I've liked the season of Mad Men. It's grown on me. I really liked the episode from Sunday night, and that was pretty solid. So we'll talk about that next week. All right. So in closing, I mean, I think we've covered most of this episode. I think we've covered most of what's happening. I'm looking through the notes here. I'm seeing a note about Jorah being butthurt. I think we covered that. We've talked about
Dario
Jamie
probably was too.
Wait.
Sorry.
Man. Not giving up on the gravy, the fork in the road. They can live in my new world or they can die in their old one, which is another, like, road not taken, right? like being burned by a dragon is nothing. It's nothing. It's not something or nothing. I don't know. It's kind of a bad. Well, whatever. But yeah, Arya's idea of death is nothing is very different from Daenerys' idea of, like, you know, Miri Mesdur being like, I won't scream, and Daenerys is like, no, you're gonna die screaming. That's how it's gonna work, right? Like, and so on and so forth. The North is cold and far away, and Lawless is close and warm, which was a really nice thing.
That was a great scene, by the way. Bronn and Tyrion together. That was a fun scene.
Yeah, definitely.
Sort of, yeah, very, very, very sort of sentimental farewells between Tyrion and his, you know, hitherto his protector and his servant, right? Like, because the Pod scene was, you know, Pod, aren't you going to turn on me and inform on me? For God's sake, what the hell are you doing? And this one was nice also. It made me write in my notes. What is love? 'Tis not hereafter. Present mirth hath present laughter.
and one other cool moment is the episode is bookended because at the very beginning Tyrion talks to or Tyrion's plot in the episode is bookended because at the beginning he talks to Jaime and he stresses that you were the golden sun. Right, he says that to him. And nothing could happen. The golden sun, he'd always loved the golden sun. Right, and then of course who comes along at the end of Tyrion's arc in this episode, but the golden sun himself, Oberyn Martell, carrying the torch, the flame, carrying the flame of that golden sun into the darkest recesses of the earth.
That's really funny, actually, because you could also see it bookended in a different way, because Oberyn tells Tyrion his story about how he wanted to see a monster and he didn't get to. And then at the beginning of the episode, right, I think it was right after the Jaime scene, you see the monster that Oberyn really is going to fight, which is the Mountain, who is basically this giant of a man who's not even a man. Like, he doesn't have any personality whatsoever, except that, like, he likes chopping bodies, which Cersei seemed happy with, so she's used to monsters herself, though, so
that is true, and she does have a way of getting what she wants. Oh yeah, and the last thing is I like Dany's bootleg Dragonstone, right, where she has the table, and then she has like the folded maps that are on top of the table. Whereas of course back in Dragonstone, her ancestral seat, where Stannis McStannis was hanging out, they have the table that actually is the map because they carved it, right? And it's like that's cooler than having to unfold your Idiot's Guide to Marine and put it on top of the thing. Yeah, and I guess the last symbol is the fire and the crown, right? When Melisandre looks into the flames, how there's like a golden crown around the fire that's burning in the middle. I just thought that was cool. Okay. Anything else, guys? Any final words?
The night is dark and full of terrors, Pete.
That is true, and it's only beginning for you, but it's been here for a few hours for us. So we will sign off. Please, if you like this, great, awesome. If you don't like it, tweet at us. Tell us what you would prefer, because maybe we'll do it, or maybe we'll engage in some sort of conversation, or maybe you just need to talk. Have you ever thought you just need to talk to somebody? Like, we'll do it. Talk to us on Twitter. Talk to us in our comment thread. Talk to us in our forums. You can talk about Hannibal in our forums. We have a very lively conversation about Hannibal that cannot see the light of day because it is too sexy and tortured in order to do so. But, yeah. What, Shayna?
Join the forums. Cut your face off. Eat your nose. Okay.
You've sold me. But yeah, if you're listening to us on the audio feed, please subscribe. If you like it, check out the main Overthinking It podcast. Many of you probably already listened. Great. If you haven't checked it out, check it out. It's great. Check out the TFT podcast, which is Rather and Sheely talking about pop music and the legacy of teenage culture and rebellion music. And it's really interesting, and it's a hard R, and it's where Matt gets to confound everybody by being incorrigible, which is awesome, and I love that. Yeah, and of course, and since I've plugged Shayna's project and Matt's project, I should plug the U.S. Navy as being a great project.
No. Plug the Case of the Week quotient. I need people to send me data.
Yeah, that's right. So Ben we do crowdsourcing every once in a while, and it's awesome when we do. There was a great crowdsourcing about Law and Order a bunch of years ago that was brilliant, and Ben is working on a crowdsourcing right now about whether the show that you love does a high or a low proportion of Monster of the Week episodes, right? That's the idea, Ben?
Right, yeah, I said Case of the Week, but Monster of the Week, Plot of the Week, Client of the Week, whatever it is, just kind of something of the week.
Yeah, so check out that story. What's the title of the story, Ben?
Case of the week quotient.
Case of the week quotient. Check out the case of the week quotient on Overthinking It. And if you're watching something that you feel isn't being covered and you want that voice to be heard, you send us that data. You join the movement, and there will be beautiful graphs. It's my God, they're full of stars. And pies and bars and lines and scatter plots. Glorious indeed. All right, but all of this stuff can be found on our home, and we hope a place where you can come as a guest to put your feet up and lay your maps out on the table, right? And eat some pie. Have some delicious pie.
Maybe.
Yeah, I don't know, whatever. Okay, well, I guess all that's left is the gravy here, which is without this, it wouldn't be an Overthinking It podcast. Without this gravy, the podcast wouldn't be a podcast, the recap wouldn't be a recap, the broadcast wouldn't be a broadcast, which is please visit us on the web at www.overthinkingit.com, where we subject the popular culture to a level of scrutiny it probably
doesn't
deserve.
Hot pie?
Hot pie? Hot pie? Hot pie? Matt, hot pie?
Hot pie?
Hot pie?
Hot pie?
Would you like my wolf bread?